My mother stood in the middle of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom and told a table full of real estate attorneys that she had rented out my bedroom. The same afternoon I moved my last box out. She laughed when she said it. So did my father. What they did not know was that the lease agreement they had signed 3 years earlier, the one sitting in a manila folder in my briefcase that very night, had quietly placed the legal rights to that property in my name. Their cruelty had just triggered the one clause that left them with nothing. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever worked your whole life for a family that treated you like a tenant in your own home. I have spent most of my adult life being very careful about what I sign. That is not an accident. I am a real estate attorney. I have spent 7 years in Chicago reviewing contracts that other people signed without reading, documents that cost them their savings, their homes, their futures. I have sat across from crying women in my office and watched them realize, too late, that one paragraph buried on page 4 had changed everything. I know better than almost anyone alive what a signature means. My parents never learned that lesson. And for a long time, I told myself that was not my problem. My name is Stella Carter. I am 32 years old. I grew up in a 4-bedroom colonial on Ridgewood Avenue in Oak Park, Illinois. The kind of neighborhood where the lawns are edged on Saturdays and the holiday lights go up the weekend after Thanksgiving without fail. From the outside, the Carter house looked like every other house on that block. Neat, stable, warm. From the inside, it ran on a set of rules that were never written down but never needed to be. Everyone understood them. Connor got the benefit of the doubt. I got the explanation. Connor got the second chance. I got the reminder of what happened the first time. Connor got the college fund topped off twice. I got a handshake and a comment about how capable I was, said in the same tone people use when they are closing a door. My brother is 4 years younger than me. He is charming in the way that people who have never faced a real consequence tend to be. Easy smile. Good at apologies that change nothing. Always between things. Between jobs, between apartments, between plans. My parents called it a phase for 11 years running. I stopped counting. I do not say any of this with bitterness. I say it because you need to understand the architecture of our family before you can understand what happened when I left it. I left at 28. I had been practicing real estate law for 2 years by then, had a 1-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park I was proud of, and had finally stopped waiting for the version of my parents that was never going to show up. The leaving was not dramatic. I packed my car over a weekend in March, took my grandmother's quilt and my law school diplomas and the cast-iron skillet I had bought myself at 23, and I drove away. My mother stood on the porch and watched me go. She did not wave, she said, and I remember this clearly because I have turned it over many times since. I hope you know what you're walking away from, Stella. I did know. That was precisely why I was walking. What I did not tell her, what I had not told either of them, was that 6 months before I moved out, I had done something quiet and careful and entirely legal. I had contacted the mortgage servicer on the Ridgewood Avenue house. My parents had refinanced in 2017, and the loan had since been sold twice and was sitting with a mid-size regional lender that was quietly offloading residential notes from their portfolio. I made an offer to purchase the mortgage at a discount. It took 11 weeks and 3 rounds of paperwork. When I drove away from Oak Park that March morning, I was not just Stella Carter, the daughter who had finally had enough. I was also the lien holder on my childhood home. I had not planned to use that. I want to be honest about that. When I bought the mortgage, I told myself it was a financial investment, a distress note at a favorable rate, the kind of thing I helped clients evaluate every week. I told myself it had nothing to do with my parents, that I was being a professional, not a daughter with something to prove. But I had also spent years drafting ironclad contracts. And I had drafted the Ridgewood Avenue lease agreement in 2019, during my second year of practice, when my parents had asked me offhandedly to put together something for a long-term tenant they were considering at the time, a plan that fell through, but the document remained. They had signed it, both of them. On page 6, notarized, I had kept the original. I drove to Chicago that Sunday with the windows down and the heat off, even though it was 40 degrees, because I needed the cold air. I was not crying. I was thinking, in the precise way I think when I am working through a problem, about what comes next. My phone rang twice before I crossed the county line. I let it go to voicemail both times. By the time I merged onto the expressway, I had already decided I was going to give them time. People surprise you sometimes. Families find their way back. I had seen it happen for other people, in other offices, in other stories. I was going to give my parents the chance to prove me wrong. They did not take long to prove me right instead. I found out on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I had just finished a 4-hour closing on a commercial property in the West Loop, and I was sitting in my car in the parking garage, eating a granola bar for lunch at 2:30 in the afternoon, which is the kind of meal you eat when you have forgotten to be a person for several days in a row. My phone was full of emails I had not answered, and a calendar that looked like someone had thrown red blocks at a wall. I was tired in the specific way that feels productive, the kind of tired you earn. The text from my mother came in at 2:47 p.m. It said, "Just so you know, we've rented your room. A young man named Marcus. He starts Friday. The extra income helps with the utilities." I read it 3 times, not because I did not understand the words. I understood the words perfectly. I read it 3 times because I was doing what I always do when something surprises me. I was giving myself a moment to make sure I was seeing it clearly before I responded. She had not asked. There was no question mark anywhere in that message. No, is that okay, or wanted to let you know in advance, or even a hope you don't mind. It was a statement of fact, delivered the way my mother delivered most things she had already decided, as a closed door presented as an open one. I put the granola bar down on the passenger seat. The room in question was not simply a room. I had lived in it for 24 years. My bookshelves were still mounted to the wall because my father had put them up with toggle bolts, and we had agreed, when I left, that I would come back in the summer to take them down properly. My grandmother's writing desk was still in the corner. Too large for my Lincoln Park apartment, too important to leave permanently. I had a box of bar exam materials in the closet that I had not gotten around to retrieving. I called my mother back. She picked up on the second ring. "Did you get my text?" she said, before I could speak. "I did," I said. "When did you decide this?" "A few weeks ago. Your father posted it online. Marcus is very clean. He works at Northwestern. It's fine. You didn't ask me." There was a pause. The particular pause my mother used was when she felt a conversation was becoming inconvenient. "Stella, you moved out. You said very clearly you were moving on. We can't just leave that room sitting empty when bills need to be paid." "What bills?" I said. "You refinanced 4 years ago. Your payment is $1,400 a month on a house you've owned for 26 years. Another pause. "Shorter this time and harder. That is not your concern anymore," she said. "You made that clear when you left." I did not raise my voice. I never raise my voice with my mother, because she is very good at turning the volume of a response into evidence of instability, and I have spent too many years refusing to give her that. I said, very evenly, that I would need to think about a few things. She said that was fine. She sounded like she had already won something. We hung up. I sat in that parking garage for another 20 minutes. A car pulled in next to me, and a woman got out with 2 children and a dry cleaning bag and the whole small machinery of an ordinary afternoon. And I watched her juggle, all of it, with the focused efficiency of someone who had stopped noticing how much she was carrying. I thought about that for a moment, then I called my paralegal and asked her to pull the Ridgewood Avenue file. That evening, I learned that Marcus Webb had moved into my room 11 days earlier, not the following Friday, as my mother had texted, but 11 days ago. The Craigslist listing had gone up 41 hours after I drove away from Oak Park. I found the archived post. The listing described the room as private, quiet, furnished. The rent was listed at $1,400 per month. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and the Ridgewood Avenue file open in front of me, and I went through it the way I go through every file, slowly, in order, without skipping anything. The lease agreement my parents had asked me to draft in 2019 was 6 pages long. I had written it during a period when I was working 70-hour weeks and had recently handled 3 cases involving landlords who had been blindsided by tenant protections they had not anticipated. I wrote that lease the way I wrote everything back then, thoroughly, and with a specific awareness of every direction things could go wrong. My parents had signed it. Both signatures on page 6, notarized by a woman named Patrice at the UPS store on Lake Street, whose stamp I recognized immediately because she had notarized half a dozen documents for our family over the years. They had signed it and never read it. I turned to page 3. Section 7 Bob was exactly where I had left it. I read it once. Then I closed the folder, finished my water, washed the glass, and went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I did not need to. I already knew what I was going to do. I was going to do nothing, for now. I was going to let things unfold at their own pace, the way a well-drafted contract always does. I was going to wait. My mother thought she had rented a room. She had no idea what she had actually set in motion. The money started bothering me more than the room. I want to be clear about something. I did not leave Oak Park because I needed my parents to treat me like a financial equal. I left because I was tired of being treated like a problem that had been managed rather than a person who had been loved. Those are different things. But when I started pulling the thread on what was actually happening at Ridgewood Avenue, what I found underneath was not just carelessness. It was a pattern that had been running for years, and I had simply never been in a position to see the full shape of it before. Marcus Webb paid Went $400 a month. I confirmed this through a source I will not name, except to say that small neighborhoods have long memories, and my parents had lived on that block for 26 years. The payment went directly into my parents' joint checking account on the first of each month, transferred electronically, documented and clean. Over the first 4 months I was tracking it, that was $5,600. My parents told no one in the family that they were collecting rent. Not my Aunt Patricia, who called my mother every Sunday, and would have mentioned it. Not my cousin Deb, who knew everything about everyone in that family, by the following Wednesday at the latest. They did not mention it at Easter, when the whole extended family came to the house and ate in the same dining room that sat 30 feet from Marcus's, from my rented bedroom. They mentioned it to Connor. I found that out in May, when Connor sent me a text that I have saved on my phone to this day. It said, "Mom says you're being weird about the room thing. You don't even live there anymore. Why do you always have to make everything complicated?" I read that text and I thought about the $5. 600. I thought about Connor's car, a 2022 Jeep Grand Cherokee that my parents had co-signed for in February, 3 months before I moved out, when Connor had been between jobs for the 7th time in 4 years and could not qualify for financing on his own. I thought about the envelope my mother had handed Connor at Christmas. I had seen her do it, slipping it to him in the kitchen while she thought I was in the living room. And the way he had pocketed it without a word, the practiced ease of someone who received things regularly and without ceremony. I did not respond to Connor's text. Instead, I made an appointment with a title company I had worked with for 3 years and asked them to run a full ownership and lien search on the Ridgewood Avenue property. The results came back in 4 days. They confirmed what I already knew, that I held the mortgage note, that my parents held title, and that there were no other encumbrances on the property beyond my lien. Then I did something I had been turning over for several weeks. I called the mortgage servicer, which was now, technically, me operating through a single-member LLC I had formed during the purchase, and I reviewed the payment history on the note. My parents had been paying consistently, never late, always the minimum. The kind of borrowers who look responsible on paper because they are doing the least possible thing correctly. I noted that, and I moved on. What I was really looking for was in the lease. I went back to the Ridgewood Avenue file on a Saturday morning in early June, when the city was warm, and the windows of my apartment were open, and someone on the street below was playing music from a speaker at a volume that suggested they had nowhere to be. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. I read the lease agreement again from the beginning, this time making margin notes in pencil the way I do when I am building a case. Section 9A was on page 4. It read, in language I had written myself and therefore understood completely. In the event that the property owner enters into any secondary tenancy agreement, sublease arrangement, or informal occupancy agreement with any third party, affecting the designated lease premises without prior written consent of the named tenant of record, such action shall constitute a material breach of this agreement and shall trigger the remedies outlined in Section 7 by. The named tenant of record, as specified on page 1, was Stella Marie Carter. Marcus Webb's occupancy of my former bedroom was, under the precise terms of the document my parents had signed and notarized, a material breach. I put my pencil down. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold while I was reading, which I only noticed when I took a sip. I got up and put it in the microwave for 45 seconds and stood at the counter while it reheated, looking out the window at the street below where the music was still playing. Something with a slow, easy rhythm, unhurried and unworried. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone the day she texted me about Marcus. That is not your concern anymore. The confidence in it, the finality, the way she said it like she was closing a filing cabinet. I thought about the lease agreement sitting on my kitchen table, 6 pages, both signatures, notarized. I thought about Section 7 Babin. I was not angry. That is the thing people always expect when I tell them this story. They expect me to say I was furious, that I had finally reached a breaking point, that something snapped. Nothing snapped. I had been a real estate attorney for 7 years. I had reviewed hundreds of contracts. I had watched dozens of people discover, too late, that a document they had signed without reading had reordered their world entirely. I knew exactly what the lease said. I knew exactly what my parents had triggered, and I had decided, somewhere between the microwave beeping and the music still drifting up from the street, that I was going to let it play out at the pace the document dictated, not the pace of my emotions, not the pace of family dinners and unanswered texts and Connor's casual cruelty over the phone, the pace of the contract. I finished my coffee. I closed the file. I went for a run along the lakefront and watched the water and did not think about Ridgewood Avenue for the rest of the afternoon, but that evening, I sent one email. Short, professional, to a colleague I trusted. The subject line was 4 words. Can you review something? I was not ready to move yet, but I was getting very close. My colleague's name is Dana Reeves. She has been practicing real estate law for 14 years, which is 7 more than me. And she has the particular energy of someone who has spent a decade and a half watching people underestimate her and has quietly stopped finding it surprising. We met during my 2nd year at the firm when she was brought in to consult on a complicated easement dispute, and she sat across the conference table from 3 senior partners and walked them through their own error so precisely and without any visible satisfaction that I decided immediately I wanted to know her better. I sent her the Ridgewood Avenue lease on a Sunday evening. By Monday morning she had responded with a single line. Where did you find this, and does the other party have legal representation? I called her. My parents signed it, I said. There was a pause. You drafted this, she said. It was not a question. I drafted it in 2019 when they asked me to put together a standard residential lease for a prospective tenant. The tenancy never happened. They kept the document. They signed it without rereading it when they decided to rent the room this spring. Another pause, longer this time. Stella, Dana said in the careful voice she uses when she is about to say something that requires precision. Do you understand what you have here? Yes, I said. Walk me through it anyway. So I did. I told her about Section 7 Bob, the right of first refusal and priority purchase option, triggered upon material breach, granting the named tenant of record the right to acquire the property at the appraised value from the date of the original lease execution, which was 2019, before the market in Oak Park had done what it subsequently did. I told her about Section 9A and the material breach that Marcus Webb's occupancy had already constituted. I told her about the mortgage note I held through my LLC, which meant I was simultaneously the lien holder and the party with purchase rights under the lease. I told her all of it in the order it happened, the way I would present it to a client. When I finished, Dana was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. You didn't do this on purpose, she said, not accusatory. More like she was confirming something for herself. I drafted the lease in 2019 before I knew they would ever actually sign it, I said. I bought the mortgage note in the fall because it was a sound financial investment at the discounted rate. Those were separate decisions made at separate times, but you kept the original lease. I keep originals of everything I draft. That is standard practice. And you knew they had signed it. I was present when they signed it. They asked me to witness the notarization. Dana made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Stella, I know, I said. What I had was this: a notarized lease agreement, signed by both Richard and Diane Carter, naming me as tenant of record on a property I had never formally occupied, but had been drafted into the document during a moment when no one, including me, anticipated it would ever be executed. A material breach had occurred the moment Marcus Webb moved into that room without my written consent. Section 7 Bob gave me the right to purchase the Ridgewood Avenue property at its 2019 appraised value, $387. This 0 in a neighborhood where comparable properties were now selling for between $610,000 and $680,000. The difference between those two numbers was $223,000 at minimum. I also held the mortgage note, which meant that any attempt by my parents to refinance, sell, or leverage the property without my cooperation was effectively impossible. I want to stop here and say something clearly, because I know how this sounds. I did not set a trap. I drafted a thorough document the way I always draft thorough documents, And my parents signed it the way they signed everything involving my professional work. With the casual confidence of people who assumed that anything I produced was automatically in their favor, because they had always assumed everything about me was automatically in their favor. They signed it because they trusted me in the specific, unconsidered way that people trust tools, not because they valued my judgment. Because they assumed my judgment would serve them, that assumption was the trap. I did not build it. They walked into it on their own. Dana agreed to review everything formally and prepare preliminary assessments. She called it, without any particular drama, one of the cleaner cases of inadvertent contractual self-entrapment she had encountered in 14 years of practice. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without doing anything in particular. Outside my window, Chicago was going about its Tuesday afternoon, buses and coffee cups, and people with their heads down against the wind off the lake. Ordinary, indifferent, moving. I thought about my mother standing on the porch of the Ridgewood Avenue house the morning I left, watching me load the last box into my car. I hope you know what you're walking away from, Stella. I thought about the lease agreement sitting in my briefcase. I thought about $387,000. I thought about $649,000, which was what 1412 Ridgewood Avenue had been appraised at in February of that year, according to the county assessor's database, which is public record, and which I had checked twice. I was not ready to move. There were still things I needed to document, positions I needed to establish, a timeline I needed to let develop a little further. A good contract case is not just about what the document says. It is about the record, the clear, unambiguous, time-stamped record of every decision the other party made freely and without coercion. My parents were not finished making decisions. I picked up my phone. I texted my mother back for the first time in 6 weeks. Hope everything is going well. How is Marcus settling in? She responded in 4 minutes. Very well, he's lovely, quiet, pays on time. I read that and set my phone face down on the table 1,400 a month, on time, into an account I now had a legal claim against. Quietly, without any visible satisfaction, I opened my laptop and began to build the file. The call came on a Thursday evening in late July. I was at my desk finishing a title opinion for a client in Evanston when my phone lit up with my mother's name. It was 6:48 p.m. My mother did not call after 6 unless something had gone wrong or she wanted something, and in my experience those two categories overlapped more often than not. I saved my document. I answered, Stella. Her voice had that particular quality, measured, controlled, with something moving underneath it like current under ice. Your father and I have been talking. Okay, I said. We feel that given the current situation with the house, the upkeep, the property taxes, the general expenses, it would be reasonable for you to contribute something monthly. As a family matter, I let that sit for a moment. Contribute to what specifically? I said, to the household. You grew up in that house. You benefited from everything we provided. Marcus helps, but it doesn't cover everything, and Connor is going through a difficult period right now and needs some support, and we feel that as a family we should all be. Mom, I said. I don't live there. You don't live there because you chose to leave, she said, and there it was, the current breaking the surface. You walked out, you made your position very clear, but that doesn't mean you don't have a responsibility to this family. Your father and I sacrificed a great deal for you, Stella. A great deal, and we are not asking for much. We are asking for $400 a month. That is nothing to you. I looked at my computer screen. The title opinion was open, halfway finished, a clean column of legal descriptions and ownership history going back to 1987. How long have you been thinking about this? I said. It doesn't matter how long. We're asking now, and if I say no? The pause that followed was different from her usual pauses. It was harder, colder. Then we will have a very different conversation about what this family looks like going forward, she said. Connor agrees with us. This is not just me and your father. I thought about Connor's text from May. Why do you always have to make everything complicated? I'll think about it, I said. We need an answer by the end of the month. I said I understood and ended the call. I did not think about it for long. There was nothing to think about. Not really. I was not going to pay $400 a month to subsidize a household that was already collecting $1,400 from a tenant occupying my former bedroom under a lease that constituted a material breach of a contract I held. That was not a financial decision. That was a matter of basic clarity about what was actually happening. But I did note the call. I noted the date, the time, the substance of the request, and the implied consequence. I added it to the Ridgewood Avenue file, which by then had grown to 41 pages and was organized into 7 tabbed sections. What I did not anticipate was Connor. He showed up at my office building 2 weeks later. I say showed up. He had apparently called the front desk and asked to be sent up, identifying himself as my brother, and the receptionist, who was new and did not yet know better, had sent him up before checking with me. I came out of a meeting to find him sitting in the small waiting area outside my office with his jacket on, despite the fact that it was 83 degrees outside, and he had taken the L, which I knew because he never drove downtown. He looked like he had prepared something to say. "Connor," I said. "I just want to talk," he said. 5 minutes. We went into my office. I left the door open. He sat across from my desk and looked around the room the way people do when they are trying to recalibrate their understanding of someone. The framed degrees, the shelves of case binders, the view of the city through the window behind me. He had never been to my office before. "Mom and Dad need help," he said. "I'm aware of what they need," I said. "They're not going to ask again, Stella. You know how they are. They asked once and you blew them off, and now Dad isn't sleeping and Mom is—" "Connor?" I kept my voice even. "I didn't blow them off. I said I would think about it. It's been 2 weeks, I'm still thinking." He leaned forward. "They're talking about taking out a second mortgage. To cover things. To help me get the cafe off the ground. It's a real opportunity, Stella. I've done the numbers. I just need the startup capital, and if they can leverage the house." He stopped. I think he saw something in my face, though I was careful about what I let show. "They're talking about refinancing," I said. "A second mortgage, yeah. The house has a lot of equity and the rates. Have they spoken to a lender yet?" He blinked. "I don't know. Maybe." "Why?" "No reason," I said. "I hope the cafe works out, Connor." He stayed another 10 minutes, cycling through variations on the same request. The family needed unity. I had always been selfish with my success. Mom cried about me. Dad had stopped going to his Thursday golf game, which Connor apparently felt was my fault. I listened to all of it. I did not argue with any of it. I told him I would be in touch, and I walked him to the elevator myself. When the doors closed, I went back to my desk and I called Dana. "They're trying to refinance," I said. "When did you find out?" 4 minutes ago. Dana was quiet for a moment. "That's the move then." "Yes," I said. "Because here is what Connor did not know, and what my parents were about to discover. Any attempt to take out a second mortgage on 1412 Ridgewood Avenue required a title search. Any title search would surface my lien. Any lender who surfaced my lien would require my written consent before proceeding. And I was, as the lien holder of record, under absolutely no legal obligation to provide it. My parents were about to walk into a bank and discover that the house they thought they owned free and clear, the house they had rented out, the house they were planning to leverage for Connor's Cafe, had a very quiet, very legal complication sitting on the title, a complication named Stella Carter. I pulled up the Ridgewood Avenue file and opened a new tab. Section 8, Lender Notification and Consent. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the way I always feel when a case I have been building carefully begins to move on its own. Focused and very still and completely ready, the title search hit on a Tuesday morning in August. I know the exact date because I received an automated notification from the county recorder's office. I had set up an alert on the property 18 months earlier, standard practice for any asset in which I held an interest. The alert came in at 9:14 a.m. while I was on the train to work. A single email with the property address and the notation. "Inquiry initiated by third-party lender." I read it once. I put my phone in my coat pocket. I watched the city slide past the window for the remaining 4 stops. I did not hear from my parents that day, or the next. On the third day, my father called. My father does not call me. That is not an exaggeration or a dramatization. In my adult life, my father has initiated perhaps a dozen phone calls to me directly, and most of those were to relay information my mother had asked him to pass along. Richard Carter is a man who expresses himself primarily through physical presence and financial provision, and since I had removed myself from the range of the first and declined the second, we had existed in a kind of mutual, comfortable distance for most of my 20s. I did not take it personally. It was simply how he was built. So when his name appeared on my screen at 7:22 p.m. on a Thursday, I knew something had shifted. "Stella," he said. His voice was different, quieter. The authority was still there. My father always sounds like a man who expects to be listened to. But underneath it was something I had not heard before. "Something careful, Dad. We ran into something with the bank, he said, regarding the house. Okay, I said. There's apparently a lien. From an LLC, he paused. The loan officer said the LLC holds the mortgage note. They can't process a second mortgage application without written consent from the lien holder. I let the silence sit for a moment. Did they give you the name of the LLC? I said. Another pause. Longer. SC Property Holdings, I see, I said. Stella. His voice had gone very flat. Is that you? SC Property Holdings is a single-member LLC I formed in September of last year, I said. I purchased the mortgage note on 1412 Ridgewood Avenue from the previous servicer at a discounted rate. It was a sound investment. The transaction was entirely legal and properly recorded with the county. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. You own our mortgage, he said. I hold the note, I said. You hold title. Those are different things. I am the lien holder of record. I heard him breathe. In and out, slow and deliberate, the way my father breathes when he is managing something he did not see coming. Your mother is going to, he started. I know, I said. We stayed on the phone for another 2 minutes without saying much of substance. He asked if we could meet. I said I was available the following week. He said he would talk to my mother. I said that was fine. We hung up without saying goodbye, which is how most of our calls end regardless of the circumstances. What came next was not my father. My mother went to her sister first. Her sister called my Aunt Patricia, who called 3 other people in the extended family before the weekend was out. And by Sunday, I had received 2 texts from cousins I had not spoken to in over a year informing me that I was tearing the family apart and acting like a stranger. One of them used the word cruel. I saved both texts in the Ridgewood Avenue file under a new tab I labeled third-party communications. Then the narrative changed. I first heard the new version from my cousin Deb, who called me on a Sunday afternoon with the particular energy of someone who believes they are doing you a favor by delivering bad news quickly. According to Deb, my mother had been telling people that I had moved out without warning, abandoned the family during a difficult period, and was now using my legal credentials to weaponize the house against parents who had sacrificed everything for me. She had told this version to the women in her book club. She had told it at church. She had mentioned it, with carefully calibrated tears, at a neighborhood gathering on Ridgewood Avenue, where several families who had known me since childhood were present. I listened to Deb tell me all of this. I thanked her. I hung up. I did not call my mother to defend myself. I did not send emails. I did not ask cousins to relay my position or post anything on any platform or reach out to the book club. I had learned early in my legal career that the most dangerous thing you can do when someone is building a false narrative against you is to engage with it on its own terms. You do not fight the story. You build the record. I was building the record. Connor, meanwhile, was escalating in a different direction. He had begun texting me every 2 to 3 days. Messages that ranged from plaintive to accusatory, depending on what time of day he sent them. The morning texts were usually appeals. Stella, just talked to Mom. This is getting out of hand. The cafe is a real opportunity, and you're killing it before it starts. The late-night texts were something else. You've always thought you were better than us. You left, and then you set this whole thing up. You planned this. One message, sent at 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, said simply, "We know about the lease too now. I read that last one twice." Then I forwarded it to Dana with a one-line note. They found the lease. Timeline is moving. Dana called me the next morning. How much do you think they understand about Section 7? By B. Enough to be frightened, I said. Not enough to know what to do about it. Their lawyer is going to tell them. Yes, I said, and then they are going to do something. She asked me what I thought they would do. I told her I thought they would hire someone, send a letter, and try to pressure me into relinquishing my rights under the lease before I could file anything formal. I told her I thought they would do this quickly, before I moved, because they would assume that urgency was on their side. I told her I was ready for the letter. It arrived 9 days later. Certified mail, from a firm in Schaumburg I did not recognize. 2 partners and an associate whose bar admission date told me he was 27 years old. The letter was 3 pages. It used the words overreach and bad faith and undue influence in the first paragraph alone. It demanded that I formally relinquish all claims under the Ridgewood Avenue lease agreement within 30 days and threatened litigation if I did not comply. It was, professionally speaking, not a strong letter. I read it standing at my kitchen counter with my coat still on. Then I set it down, took off my coat, made coffee, and called Dana. They sent the letter, I said. How bad is it? It is the letter of people who are frightened and moving fast, I said. Dana said she would prepare a response. I told her to take her time. There was no rush on my end. A 30-day deadline on a demand letter was not a countdown. It was an invitation to demonstrate composure I had been composing for a long time. What my parents did not know, and what their Schaumburg attorney had apparently not yet told them, was that responding to a demand letter was not the only option available to me. I had another option. A cleaner one. One that did not require litigation or negotiation or any of the back and forth that frightened people assume is inevitable. I had a gala to attend. The Chicago Real Estate Law Association held its annual benefit dinner every September at the Ritz-Carlton on East Pearson. I had attended for 4 consecutive years. My firm had a table. Several of the most prominent property attorneys in the city attended, along with title company executives, municipal judges, and, in most years, at least 2 members of the Illinois Real Estate Commission. My mother had been invited, as she was every year, by a woman named Constance Fairfax, whose husband sat on the association's board and who had grown up 2 streets over from Ridgewood Avenue and had known my mother since before I was born. My mother attended every year because Constance invited her, and because my mother liked being in rooms where real estate attorneys gathered, liked the reflected importance of it, liked telling people her daughter was one of them. She had RSVP'd for September 14th. I had known this since June. I had been waiting, quietly and without any visible impatience, for September 14th. It was now August 29th. I had 16 days. Dana's response to the Schaumburg letter went out on a Wednesday. It was 4 paragraphs, measured, precise, and written in the specific register that experienced attorneys use when they want opposing counsel to understand, without being told directly, that the other side has significantly overestimated their position. Dana did not threaten. She did not escalate. She simply, and this is a word I use deliberately, clarified. She outlined the execution history of the lease agreement, the notarization record, the material breach constituted by Marcus Webb's occupancy, and the triggering conditions of Section 7B, citing each clause by number and page. The final paragraph noted, without commentary, that SC Property Holdings remained the lien holder of record on the subject property, and that any proposed refinancing, secondary encumbrance, or transfer of title would require written consent from the lien holder pursuant to the terms of the recorded mortgage instrument. She closed by inviting opposing counsel to contact her directly with any questions. She did not give them 30 days. She gave them 10. I read the letter twice before she sent it, suggested 2 small changes to the phrasing in paragraph 3, and approved it. Then I went back to work on a commercial closing in the South Loop and did not think about Ridgewood Avenue for the rest of the day. The Schaumburg firm responded in 6 days. Their second letter was shorter than the first. The words overreach and bad faith did not appear. What did appear, toward the end of the second page, was a request for a settlement conference, a meeting between the parties to discuss, as they put it, a mutually agreeable resolution of the outstanding contractual matters. Dana forwarded it to me with a 1-line note. They blinked. I called her. "What do you want to do?" "I want to know what you want to do," she said. I thought about it. A settlement conference meant a room, a table, attorneys on both sides, and my parents sitting across from me while someone tried to broker a compromise. It meant my mother's face. It meant my father's silence. It meant Connor, possibly, at the end of a phone on speaker, because he would insist on being included. It meant a negotiation in which I held every significant card and would still be asked to give something up, because that is what settlement conferences are, exercises in making the losing party feel less like they lost. "Not yet," I said. "Stella, I am not opposed to a resolution," I said carefully. "I am opposed to a premature one. There are things that need to happen first." Dana knew me well enough not to push. "September 14th, she said. "September 14th, I said. What I had spent the previous 3 weeks doing was not dramatic. It was paperwork, the least dramatic, most consequential paperwork of my professional life. I had filed the formal notice of breach with the county recorder's office, establishing the public record of the material breach under Section 9A. I had submitted the Section 7 BOB, purchase option activation, to the title company, initiating the formal appraisal process based on the 2019 valuation date. I had retained a second attorney, a litigator named Howard Beale, whom I had referred clients to for years, and who had the particular quality of being very calm in rooms where other people were not, to serve as counsel of record if the matter proceeded to court. I had also, and this required some delicacy, spoken to Marcus Webb. I had not approached him as an adversary. Marcus was 27 years old, worked in university administration, and had rented a room in good faith from a couple who had presented themselves as the unencumbered owners of the property. He had done nothing wrong. He deserved to know that the lease under which he was living had complications and that those complications were not his fault and would not affect his occupancy during the resolution period. We met for coffee near the Northwestern campus on a Thursday afternoon. He was quieter than I expected, measured, a little wary, which was reasonable given that a stranger had contacted him about his living situation. I explained the situation in general terms. I told him his tenancy was not at risk in the near term. I told him I wanted him to have independent legal advice before signing any new lease documents my parents might present to him. He looked at me across the coffee shop table for a moment. "Are they in trouble?" he said. "They are in a situation of their own making," I said. "I would encourage you to speak to an attorney before you sign anything," he nodded slowly. "Your parents seem nice," he said. "Your mom made me a pie when I moved in." I thought about my mother making a pie for a stranger living in my bedroom while she told her book club I had abandoned the family. "That sounds like her," I said. I drove home from that coffee meeting and added a tab to the Ridgewood Avenue file. Web, Disclosure and Advisement. Complete. The file was now 63 pages. On September 9th, 5 days before the gala, the Schaumburg firm called Dana directly. Their client, they said, was prepared to offer a full release of the Section 7B purchase option in exchange for Stella Carter's voluntary relinquishment of the mortgage note, essentially a trade. I keep my purchase rights, they keep the mortgage. Or I keep the mortgage, they keep the house free of my purchase option. Dana presented it to me over the phone that evening. "It's not a bad offer structurally," she said. "It's a panicked offer," I said. "They're trying to split the position before the 14th. What makes you think they know about the 14th? "Constance Fairfax and my mother have been friends for 30 years, I said. "My mother knows I attend that gala every year. She has known since June that I would be in that room." Dana was quiet. "She's going to be there," I said. "And she has been telling people a story about me for 2 months. And she does not yet know the full shape of what she signed, and you want her to find out in that room." "I want the record to be complete before any settlement happens," I said. "I want the people who have heard her version of this story to also be present when the actual facts become clear." "That is not revenge, Dana. That is documentation in the most public possible form." Dana did not respond immediately. "Howard is ready if we need him," she said finally. "I know," I said. "We won't need him." On the evening of September 13th, I laid out what I was going to wear the following night. A navy wrap dress I had bought for a closing dinner 2 years earlier, quiet and professional. I set my briefcase by the door. Inside it was a single manila folder containing 4 documents: the executed lease agreement, the Section 7B Bob, activation notice filed with the county, the lien confirmation from the title company, and Dana's response letter to Schaumburg. Not because I intended to produce them dramatically in the middle of a ballroom, because I had spent 7 years as a real estate attorney and I did not go anywhere without my file. I set my alarm for 6:30. I made sure my dress was pressed. I went to bed at 10 and lay in the dark for a while, not anxious, not restless, just quiet, the way I get before a closing when everything is in order and all that remains is the signing. Everything was in order. All that remained was the signing. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom looks the same every September: ivory tablecloths, low arrangements of white flowers, the particular warmth of a room lit entirely by chandeliers, and the kind of candles that cost more than most people's dinner. The Chicago Real Estate Law Association has been holding this dinner for 22 years, and the aesthetic has not changed significantly in at least the last 5, which I find either reassuring or uninspired, depending on my mood. That evening I found it reassuring. I wanted familiar. I wanted a room I knew. I arrived at 6:45, which is 15 minutes before the cocktail hour begins, and therefore exactly right. Early enough to locate the room's geography, identify who was already there, and choose where I stood before the crowd filled in. I checked my coat. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. I found my firm's table and confirmed my seat assignment, then moved to the far side of the room near the windows that looked out over East Pearson. My parents arrived at 7:12. I saw them before they saw me. My mother came in first, the way she always enters a room she considers important. A half beat ahead of my father, chin slightly elevated, eyes moving quickly across the space to locate familiar faces. She was wearing a deep burgundy dress I had not seen before, and her hair was done the way she did it, for occasions, swept back and precise. She looked well. She looked like a woman who belonged in the room, which is exactly what she intended. My father followed 2 steps behind. He scanned the room differently than she did, not for people he knew, but for exits and corners. The instinct of a man who has always been more comfortable on the edges of social gatherings than their centers. He was wearing the navy suit he wore to every formal event. He looked tired. Constance Fairfax materialized at my mother's elbow within 90 seconds, the way she always did at these events, and the two of them began the ritual exchange of a reunion between women who have known each other for decades and have a great deal to say. I watched my mother's face while she talked. The animation in it, the ease, the performance of a woman in her natural environment. I did not move toward them. I was at the table of James Whitfield, a senior partner at one of the oldest real estate firms in the city, when my mother finally saw me. James and I had worked on 3 transactions together in the past 2 years, and he was telling me about a complicated land trust case in DuPage County when I saw, over his shoulder, my mother's expression change. It was not dramatic. It was small, a fractional pause in whatever she had been saying to Constance, a slight recalibration of her posture. She had not expected me to already be in conversation with James Whitfield. I could see her calculating. She crossed the room. Stella. She said it with the particular warmth my mother produces in public. Full, easy, the warmth of a woman who wants the people around her to believe that warmth is her default setting. She put her hand briefly on my arm. I didn't know you'd be here. I'm here every year, I said. James Whitfield turned to her with the polished attention of a man who has been attending these events for 3 decades. Diane Carter. Your daughter is one of the sharpest property attorneys I've worked with in years. My mother smiled. We're very proud of her, she said. I watched her say it. I watched the ease of it, how smoothly it came, how naturally she inhabited the role of the proud mother in a room full of her daughter's professional peers. The same woman who had stood on that porch and watched me drive away, the same woman who had spent 2 months telling her book club I had abandoned the family. That's kind of you to say, I said. James, have you met Howard Beale? He just joined our table. I had positioned Howard deliberately. He was standing 4 feet away with a glass of wine, and the relaxed expression of a man who has spent 30 years in courtrooms and finds ballrooms comparatively restful. He turned when I said his name. Howard, I said. This is my mother, Diane Carter. Howard shook her hand. His expression was professional and pleasant and revealed absolutely nothing. My mother's eyes moved between us. A litigation attorney and a property attorney, standing together at her daughter's firm table. I watched her try to read the room. We sat for dinner at 8. I was placed by the seating arrangement Dana had quietly helped me request 3 weeks earlier, at a table that included James Whitfield, 2 members of the Illinois Real Estate Commission, a municipal court judge named Patricia Ossie, who had presided over 3 property cases I had worked on, and Constance Fairfax's husband Gerald, who sat on the association's board. My parents were at Constance's table, 12 feet away and slightly to my left, close enough to see clearly, far enough that any conversation at my table was not audible to them unless voices were raised. The dinner proceeded. First course, second course. The association president's remarks, the presentation of this year's community award. I ate. I talked. I listened to James describe the DuPage land trust case in more detail than it probably warranted. I spoke with Judge Ossie about a zoning variance issue that had come up in one of her recent cases and that touched on an area of property law I had been researching. It was, in every observable way, an ordinary evening among colleagues. Then Constance Fairfax leaned toward my mother. I could not hear what she said, but I had known Constance Fairfax peripherally for years, and I knew that she was not a malicious woman. She was a generous one, the kind of generous that sometimes does damage without meaning to. She leaned toward my mother and said something, gesturing slightly in my direction, and I watched my mother's expression settle into the version she used when she was about to tell a story she had rehearsed. My mother began to speak. I cannot tell you exactly what she said. I can tell you that Gerald Fairfax's expression shifted first, a small tightening around the eyes. I can tell you that Constance glanced toward my table with a look I recognized as discomfort. I can tell you that my mother spoke for approximately 90 seconds, and that at the end of those 90 seconds, she was looking at me across the 12 feet of ivory tablecloth, between us with the expression of a woman who had just said her piece in a room she considered favorable territory. James Whitfield had stopped talking. I became aware that the conversation at my table had paused. I set down my fork. I picked up my water glass. I looked at my mother. Then I looked at James. James, I said, at a volume that was conversational but clear. I should mention, in the interest of full disclosure, that the property matter I referenced last month, the Ridgewood Avenue lien situation, involves my parents. I want to make sure there's no appearance of a conflict given our working relationship. James looked at me, then at my mother, then back at me, with the expression of a man who has practiced long enough to understand exactly what was happening. Of course, he said. Appreciate the transparency. Judge O.C. looked up from her water glass. I turned toward my mother's table. Mom, I said, same volume, same register. I think it might be time to have an honest conversation about the lease. The table went quiet, not just my table. The 4 tables within conversational range went quiet in the specific way that rooms go quiet when something real is happening. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the sudden focused attention of people who recognize they are about to witness something that cannot be undone. My mother's face did something I had never seen it do before. The warmth drained out of it. Not replaced by anger. Not yet. Replaced by the expression of someone who has just realized that the room they believed was theirs has different acoustics than they thought. My father put his hand flat on the table. I opened my briefcase. I did not produce the folder dramatically. I did not hold it up or announce what it was. I simply placed it on the table in front of me and opened it to the first page. The executed lease agreement, both signatures visible, the notary stamp from Patrice at the UPS store on Lake Street, and I said, still at the same conversational volume, to no one in particular and everyone in earshot, the document is 6 pages. They signed it in 2019. I've been the named tenant of record and the lien holder on that property for some time now. Everything that has happened since has been a matter of public record. Constance Fairfax looked at the folder. Gerald looked at the folder. Judge O.C. looked at the folder with the particular attention of someone whose professional life involves reading documents carefully. My mother looked at me. Stella, she said. Her voice had lost its public register entirely. What was underneath it was something I had not heard before, not anger, not the cold authority she used at home, but something smaller and rawer and genuinely afraid. I know, I said quietly, just to her. I know. My father's hand was still flat on the table. He did not look at me. He looked at the tablecloth, and then at the window, and then at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man who has just understood something that has been true for a very long time. The room, after a moment, resumed its conversations, but not at our tables. Not yet. The evening ended quietly. That surprises people when I tell them. They expect a scene, raised voices, a dramatic exit, someone's water glass knocked over in the commotion. It was not like that. The ballroom continued its program. The dessert course arrived. The association president gave his closing remarks. People collected their coats and said their goodbyes and moved toward the exit in the ordinary current of a formal evening, winding down. What changed was subtler than a scene. It was a reordering. James Whitfield walked me to the coat check. He did not say much. James is not a man who fills silence unnecessarily. But as we waited, he said, in a tone that was measured and without performance, if you need a character reference for any of the proceedings, I'm available. I thanked him. He nodded and left. Judge O.C. stopped me near the exit. She did not reference anything specific. She simply said, that was handled well, in the voice she uses on the bench when she means something precisely and wants it understood precisely. I thanked her too. Gerald Fairfax shook my hand before I left. He held it a half-second longer than a standard handshake and did not say anything at all, which told me everything I needed to know about what my mother had said to Constance over the past 2 months, and what Gerald thought of it now. My parents left before dessert. I watched them go from across the room. My mother moving quickly, her burgundy dress catching the chandelier light, my father half a step behind, with his hand on the small of her back, steering rather than following for once. My mother did not look back. My father glanced over his shoulder once, found me, and held the look for 2 seconds before the crowd closed between us. I finished my dessert. I spoke with 2 more colleagues. I left at 10:15. In the car, I called Dana. How did it go? She said. As expected, I said. Your mother? She understood what the room represented. She understood that the people in it had now heard a different version of events than the one such she had been circulating. And your father? I thought about his hand on the table. The way he had looked at the window. He's known for a while, I said. He just hadn't let himself know that he knew. Dana was quiet for a moment. Howard filed the formal petition this afternoon. Section 7, activation, purchase option exercise, full documentation package to the county. It's on the record now. Good, I said. Stella. Her voice shifted slightly. Are you okay? I was on Lake Shore Drive. The city lit up on my left, and the lake dark and flat on my right, and I thought about that question for a moment. Yes, I said. And I meant it, which surprised me a little. The response from the Schaumburg firm came 4 days later. It was not a letter. It was a phone call to Howard. Their client, they said, wished to discuss a comprehensive settlement. The tone had changed entirely. The words overreach and bad faith were gone. What remained was the careful, flattened language of people who have spoken to a litigator and understood, finally, the full weight of what they were facing. Howard presented me with the terms they were proposing. My parents would acknowledge the validity of the lease agreement and the Section 7 BIBE purchase option, agree to a structured buyout of the mortgage note at face value plus a negotiated premium, and provide a written acknowledgement of the material breach for the county record. In exchange, I would agree not to exercise the Section 7B purchase option in full, meaning I would not take the house. I read the terms. I called Howard. What do you think? I said, I think it is a serious offer from people who have spoken to a serious attorney, he said. They understand now what the full exercise of Section 7 would mean. I knew what it would mean. It would mean that my parents would be required to sell the Ridgewood Avenue house to me at the 2019 appraised value of $387,000 in a market where it was now worth $649,000. It would mean they would lose $262. Zuzo in equity they had spent 26 years building, in a single transaction, the consequence of a document they had signed without reading. I sat with that for 3 days. I want to be honest about those 3 days because people sometimes ask me, when I tell them this story, whether I considered taking the house, whether I wanted it, whether there was a version of me that sat at my kitchen table and thought, yes, I will take everything, and it will be enough. I thought about it. I would be lying if I said I did not. But I am a real estate attorney. I spend my professional life helping people hold on to the things that are theirs. I know what a house means to people who have lived in it for 26 years, not as an asset on a balance sheet, but as the physical fact of a life. I knew what Ridgewood Avenue meant to my father, who had planted every tree in that yard and repainted the garage door 4 times in 26 years because he cared about how it looked. I knew what it meant to my mother, for all her failures, because I had grown up inside it and I understood in my body what it was. I did not want the house. I wanted the record. I wanted the acknowledgement. I wanted the documented, legally binding proof that I had been right about every factual matter in dispute, established through the proper channels, witnessed by the relevant parties, filed with the appropriate offices. I wanted my parents to know that I had known, all along, exactly what they had signed. That was what I wanted, and the settlement gave me all of it. On a Wednesday morning in early October, I sat at a conference table at Howard's firm with my parents on the opposite side. My mother came in first. She looked smaller than she had at the gala, not physically, but in the way that people look smaller when the room they are in does not belong to them and they know it. She sat down without looking at me. Directly, my father came in behind her. He sat down, folded his hands on the table, and looked at me with the direct, steady look of a man who has made his peace with something difficult. I nodded at him. He nodded back. It took 2 hours. The Schaumburg attorney read the terms aloud. Howard annotated. My parents' attorney made 2 minor requests for language changes, both of which Howard accepted. I signed where indicated. My parents signed where indicated. When it was done, the room was very quiet. My father cleared his throat. Stella, he said. Just my name, nothing after it. My mother was looking at her hands. I did not say anything for a moment, then I said, the house is yours. It was always going to stay yours. I just needed you to know what you had. My mother looked up. Her eyes were wet, not crying, not yet, but close. She opened her mouth and closed it again. I gathered my copies of the documents and put them in my briefcase. As we were leaving, my father stopped in the hallway outside the conference room. The Schaumburg attorney had gone ahead. Howard was inside collecting papers. It was just the three of us in a carpeted corridor that smelled like coffee and recycled air. Connor called us last night, my father said. The cafe fell through. The investors pulled out. I looked at him. He's going to need some time, my father said. It was not a request. It was just a statement, the kind my father made when he was reporting a fact he knew I already understood. He usually does, I said. My mother made a sound. Half breath, half something else. She pressed her lips together. I picked up my briefcase. I'll be in touch, I said. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. I waited. Behind me, I could hear my parents moving, the small sounds of two people gathering themselves in a hallway after something has ended. The elevator opened. I got in. The doors closed. I rode down 17 floors in silence, watching the numbers decrease on the small display above the door. In the lobby, I stopped for a moment. The revolving door was in front of me, the street visible beyond it. October light, pale and clean, the city moving at its usual indifferent pace. Someone pushed through the door from outside and brought a brief gust of cold air with them, the first real cold of the season, and I stood in it for a second before it dissipated. Then I pushed through the door and stepped outside. 3 days later, at 9:14 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a notification. A certified letter had been delivered to 1412 Ridgewood Avenue, Oak Park, Illinois. Return address, SC Property Holdings. It contained the formal written acknowledgement of the material breach, executed and notarized, and a single additional document, the release of the mortgage note, transferred back to my parents' names, free and clear, at no cost to them, not because I owed it to them, because I had decided, alone and without consulting anyone, that carrying the note was no longer necessary. I had what I needed. The record was complete. The house could be theirs again, fully and without complication, but not before they understood, in writing, signed, and notarized and filed with the county recorder's office, exactly what they had signed, exactly what they had missed, exactly what I had known all along. My mother called me that afternoon. She did not say much. She said thank you, in a voice I had not heard from her before, quiet, stripped of its usual architecture, just two words with nothing performing around them. You're welcome, I said. We stayed on the phone for a moment without speaking. Then she said, I made a pie last week. Apple. Your grandmother's recipe. I looked out my office window at the October city. Save me a slice. I said she said she would. I do not know if that is the beginning of something or simply the end of something else. I have learned in 32 years of being Richard and Diane Carter's daughter not to mistake a single moment for a pattern, but I noted it. I added it to the file. In a new tab I labeled simply. Then I closed my laptop and went home. 18 months later, the Ridgewood Avenue house is still on Ridgewood Avenue. My parents still live in it. The lawn is still edged on Saturdays. The garage door, which my father repainted for the 5th time last spring. Ivory this time, a change from the previous cream, a distinction he explained to me for approximately 12 minutes over the phone in April, looks the same as it always did from the street. Marcus Webb moved out in January of the year after the settlement, quietly and without incident, having found an apartment closer to his office. My mother baked him a pie when he left too. I have come to accept that this is simply what she does. Connor's Cafe did not happen. The investor who pulled out was the third in 14 months. A fact I learned from my father in pieces over several phone calls, delivered in the careful, fractional way my father delivers information he finds embarrassing by proximity. Connor spent the winter after the settlement living back at Ridgewood Avenue, which I chose not to have feelings about, and by spring he had taken a position at a property management company in Naperville. Entry level, my father said, but steady. I noted that. Steady was not a word I had previously associated with my brother. He texted me in February. Not an apology exactly. Connor does not do apologies in the conventional sense, but something adjacent to one. It said I was out of line last year. A lot. I know that. I read it 3 times. Then I wrote back, I know you do. We have not spoken on the phone since, but we have exchanged texts with increasing regularity and decreasing hostility, which I consider, for us, significant progress. My mother and I have dinner once a month. That sentence still surprises me when I say it. Once a month, on a Thursday, at a restaurant we rotate through, never Ridgewood Avenue. Not yet, that is a threshold we are both approaching at our own pace. She does not bring up the settlement. I do not bring it up either. We talk about her book club, which has apparently become quite serious and is currently working through a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt that my mother finds both inspiring and irritating in equal measure. We talk about my cases in the general terms I am permitted to discuss. We talk about the neighborhood, my father's ongoing campaign to convince the city to repave the street in front of their house, The new family that moved in 2 doors down with 3 children and a dog that has strong opinions about squirrels. It is not the relationship I would have designed if I had been given a choice. It is partial and careful, and requires maintenance in the way that things require maintenance, when they have been repaired rather than replaced. But it is real. And it is, in the specific and limited way that partial and careful things can be, enough. My father calls me on Sunday afternoons now, not every Sunday, some Sundays, but regularly enough that I have stopped being surprised by it, which is its own kind of milestone. We do not talk about large things. We talk about the trees he planted in the yard. The oak in the back corner is apparently doing something interesting with its root system that concerns him, and about the cubs, and occasionally about a news story he has read and wants a second opinion on. Last October, he drove into the city, and we had lunch at a diner near my office. And he ordered a patty melt and read the menu for 4 minutes before ordering the same thing he always orders, and we sat there for an hour and a half in the comfortable silence of two people who have stopped needing to explain themselves to each other. When he left, he hugged me in the way he used to when I was small. Brief, firm, no ceremony. I stood on the sidewalk and watched his car pull out and thought about the parking garage 2 years earlier, where I had sat eating a granola bar at 2:30 in the afternoon, reading my mother's text about Marcus Webb. How long ago that felt. How close it still was. The law firm I opened in March of this year is called Carter Property Law. 3 attorneys, 1 paralegal, 1 office in the West Loop, with windows that face southwest and catch the afternoon light in a way I did not plan but have come to depend on. We specialize in residential property rights, lease disputes, and the specific category of cases that I once described to Dana as contractual self-entrapment. Situations where someone has signed something without reading it, and another party holds the consequence. I take a certain kind of client in particular. Women, mostly, though not exclusively. People who have been told that the legal document in front of them is a formality, just paperwork, nothing to worry about, sign here. People who come into my office with a folder of things they were given without explanation and sit across my desk and say some version of, I think something is wrong, but I don't know what. I know what. I always know what. Dana joined the firm in June as a senior partner. She moved her practice from the Loop, with 2 clients and a reputation and the particular energy of someone who has been waiting for the right room and finally walked into it. We have lunch on Tuesdays. We disagree about billing practices and the correct way to organize a case file and whether the office should have a plant in the reception area, and we are, without either of us having said so directly, each other's most important professional relationship. Howard Beale refers cases to us. James Whitfield has sent us 3 clients. Judge Ossie, when I see her at events, gives me the nod. The specific, unhurried nod of someone who respects the way you handled a thing. The Ridgewood Avenue file is in a banker's box in the storage room at the back of the office. All 63 pages of it, plus the settlement documents, the county filings, the lien release, and the tab I labeled after. I do not look at it often. But it is there, complete, organized, documented in the specific and unambiguous way that I have always believed important things deserve to be documented. There is one more thing. I went back to Oak Park in September, on the anniversary of the gala. Not for any reason I could have explained in advance. I was driving back from a site visit in the western suburbs, and I found myself on the Eisenhower going east, and I took the Oak Park exit without deciding to. I drove down Lake Street and then south on Ridgewood Avenue, and I pulled up in front of 1412 and sat in the car for a few minutes. The house looked the same. The oak in the front yard had gone fully golden. It always turns early. I had forgotten that, and there were 2 pumpkins on the front steps that I recognized as my mother's doing, round and symmetrical, and placed with the precision she brought to all visible things. The garage door was ivory. The lawn was edged. My father was in the side yard. He had not seen me yet. He was raking leaves in the deliberate, methodical way he does everything physical, starting at the far edge and working inward, row by row, not hurrying. He had headphones in. He was wearing the old green jacket he has worn for yard work since I was in middle school, the one with the broken zipper that my mother has tried to replace 3 times and that he keeps retrieving from wherever she puts it. I watched him for a minute. Then I got out of the car. He looked up when I closed the door. He pulled one headphone out. He looked at me across the lawn with the expression he had when he called me that Thursday evening, the expression of a man who is careful about what he lets show, but who is not, at this particular moment, being careful. Stella, he said. Hey, Dad, I said. He looked at the rake in his hands, then back at me. You want to help? He said. I walked across the lawn. He handed me the other rake, the old aluminum one that has been in the garage since before I was born, and we worked from opposite ends toward the center. Without talking, the dry leaves gathering in rows between us, the October light coming down through the oak at the long flat angle it only gets in the fall. We raked for 45 minutes. We did not discuss the settlement. We did not discuss Connor or my mother or the lease or the mortgage or the gala or any of the things that had occupied the previous 2 years of our lives. We talked about the oak tree's root system, which was indeed doing something interesting, and about the cubs, and about the new family 2 doors down, whose dog had recently made its opinions about squirrels known at 6:30 in the morning. When we finished, my father gathered the leaves into bags with the focused efficiency of a man who finds satisfaction in a task completed. I held the bags open. He filled them. We worked through 4 bags, and he tied each one with the same firm double knot. When the last bag was tied, he stood up and looked at the yard. Clean now, the grass visible again, the raked lines still faintly visible in the late light. Looks good, he said. It does, I said. He took the aluminum rake back and walked it to the garage. I stood in the yard and looked at the oak tree and the pumpkins on the steps and the ivory garage door and the house that was theirs, fully and without complication, the way I had decided it should be. Then I got in my car and drove back to Chicago. The lake was silver when I came over the expressway, flat and wide and indifferent, the city rising on the left and the water going out to the right as far as I could see. I drove with the windows up and the heat on low and the radio playing something quiet that I did not bother to identify. I was not angry. I had not been angry for a long time. I was something harder to name, not healed, not finished, not arrived at some resolved and permanent peace. Just moving. Just Stella Carter. 32 years old, driving home in October with the city ahead of her, and a clean yard behind her, and a file in a banker's box that said everything that needed to be said, in language that could not be misread, signed and witnessed, and filed with the appropriate offices. I had written the document, I had kept the original, and when the time came, I had simply let it say what it always said. They called it a lease agreement. 6 pages, 2 signatures, 1 notary stamp. What it really was, what any contract really is, at its heart, is a record of what people believed when they signed it. My parents believed they were signing a formality. Something their daughter had prepared for them. Something they could trust without reading, because they had always trusted that what I produced would serve them without question. They were wrong about that. Not about my love for them, whatever complicated, partial, repaired thing that is, but about what trust requires. Trust is not the absence of reading. Trust is not the assumption that someone else has already handled the things you cannot be bothered to understand. Trust is the willingness to know what you are agreeing to and agree to it anyway. I have sat across my desk from enough people who did not read what they signed to know that this lesson cost something every single time. It cost my parents 2 years, a settlement, and the particular humiliation of discovering that the document that undid them was one they had asked their daughter to write. I hope it stays with them. I think it will, if you have ever been handed a document and told it was nothing, read it. If you have ever been in a family that asked you to produce things they refused to value, document everything. And if you have ever sat in a parking garage at 2:30 in the afternoon, eating a granola bar and wondering how you got there, you already know more than you think. Leave a comment and tell me, has someone in your family ever underestimated what you knew? I want to hear your story. Like this video if you believe that dignity is worth protecting, and subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. I will see you then.